So tonight we're going to build this in all its glory. Alright, so I built the other side first so that you guys wouldn't have to suffer through watching me figure it all out. So we'll start off with building the lower control arm, or the upper control arm. So, let's see. Are the jam nuts. I had all this sorted, and one of the shop dogs managed to knock everything off on the floor, so I had to resort it. Not again. I'm trying to screw a These are not the jam nuts. Oh, that one is. So the instructions show how to thread the jam nuts all the way down until they stop. This must be a reverse thread. Let's go with this one. Aha. These get threaded in here all the way down until you can see 2 or 3 threads. Side. Side, and that's all that it takes to assemble the upper control arm. The lower control arm is equally as simple. These 2 aluminum bushings go inside the lower control arm. That is all that is required for the lower and upper control. Next, shocks. Shocks have to be assembled, collars. Any of you guys have ever built an RC car? I've put together a few for my son. These things are identical to an RC car shock. The spring cups and everything like that. This whole kit kind of reminds me of building in one of his RC cars. Spring cup. these are just temporarily getting put together because I have the thrust bearings on order, and I also don't have any of the permanent NICs to put on the shock body. So we're just going to assemble it for the sake of assembling. I can grab some snap ring pliers. These shocks are very small, so I had to modify my snap ring pliers to fit these snap rings. But they don't give any specific orientation in the manual. And then you end up with something just like that. Same thing on the other end. This one's typically a little bit harder to get in because of the anodization. Oh, no. Maybe it's just me that struggles with it. And like so. Now, on this shock, it requires this to be installed. It's a bump stop, so I'm going to go off camera for a second and take this loose in my vise. Put this bump stop in real quick. 1 second. And we're back. So that's what the bump stop looks like installed. It says you have to torque this nut to 12 foot-pounds. I couldn't find my box-end torque wrench or anything kind of like that. So yeah, we just kind of guessed. I mean, and after that, and this is where you're definitely supposed to apply NICs, and like I said, I'm going to end up taking this back apart, so it won't matter. There's a little shoulder on these that has to face towards the bottom of the shock, or towards the lock nut actually, or the shock collar, the spring collar. This is the lock nut. But as I say, I'll be taking these back apart to put the thrust bearings in. So you're supposed to thread it down just to where the shock body stops right before the cap. This is the bearing that comes in the kit, which we get replaced, and then the shock collar goes on like this. If you're actually going to use this style, you always want to make sure that that bearing plate is always centered with this shoulder that's inside the lock nut. Then after that, there's a specific way that spring goes on. There's no mention of it in shock assembly instructions. So So I'm running the 600-pound springs on the front of my truck because I want it to turn as flat as it can. Pull these out. Spring color slips in. And then turn the whole assembly upside down. And bring the shock collar and locking that down to read it. Oop, see, that can happen. And that is the front shock assembly. So we'll move over now and actually install these components in the spindle on. And if I have time tonight, we might go ahead and do the power rack for the rack and pinion steering. All right, so we're back. The lower control arm, remember these sleeves have to go in. It just slips up here. No shims on this. So this is your hardware. You have a large washer that backs up to here. So this is a little bit tricky to get the front one in. The bolt has to go in through there. Oh, there we go. It's only tricky when you try to do it, film it. It's gonna be like that. Start over. Okay. So this one goes through. It's supposed to. And we'll actually thread into the cross member up front. The rear bolt goes through. There we go. Slides through. It's a washer and a nut on the back. These get torqued to 90 foot-pounds, I believe. I'd have to check to verify. Now we'll move up and do the upper control arm. Okay, so continuation of the upper control arm. So in the instructions, one thing that I forgot to mention over there is you have shock bush or eyelet bushings, and you have to shim them. And from the way I understand the instructions, the front rod end needs to be centered here. So they give you an assortment of shims to put in to center these up. Unfortunately, they don't give you enough of the same size shim that if you required the same size shim at all four mounting points, you'd have enough shims. So you have to stack some shims together to get the correct thickness. So this was the pack that the shims that I used on the other side. So we'll see if it's a good starting point here. Shims go on over these collars, like so, and then just slip into the rod ends. And if you got it right, it will just slip in there. Yeah, just like that. That's a nice positive, or nice good fit. That's a good fit. It fits. All right, I'm gonna go grab the alignment cam, eccentric bolts, and the alignment tabs. So no washers on this part. So in the instructions it talks about making the fangs up, and this is what they're referring to as having the fang up. So cam bolt slips in there. There we go. There's the nut. So you line the bolt up on the locating, or the cam on the locating pin, and like that, and then the nut goes on there. The rear is the exact same way. You'll put the bushings in, the rod ends, put the shims in, alignment bolt, cam pins, all that. So let me go set that up real quick, and we'll come back to putting the shock in. All right, so we'll start with the top of the shock first, and then go to the bottom. So in this, on the front end, the shocks get installed with the clickers down towards the lower control arm. So it's a bolt, and one of these shims or spacers. And that gets put in there. And this is where having 3 hands would be super helpful. Push that through. That gets that upper shock mounted. And then I'll go get the bolt for the lower mount. We'll mount the lower shock and move on to the next step. All right, and then for the lower, it's just a matter of pulling this up. Now this on the other side was a bit tight. I believe it's because of the powder coat, where here I'm getting a break. Okay. Then you install this with a shim facing this way and a nut. Now this is going to seem a little long. I am actually installing the QA1 control arm, or sway bars for this set, and the sway bar end links will attach here on both sides. So that's why that's a bit long there. If you're not doing the sway bars, you may want to look for a smaller, shorter bolt, because you'll have a lot of threads sticking out. So we can go ahead and do the front spindle as well. Grab that. Oh, dogs. All right, so there's no good way to film this. I'm just going to try and do it with one hand and film it with the other. So there's your spindle that goes on the lower control arm. And there's actually supposed to be a washer in here, but I'm still kind of just mocking this up, so there probably won't be tonight. It's going to come back apart. Just mainly trying to get everything set up, make sure that everything looks good, that it steers good, everything along those lines, before I actually torque the rest of it down. And then the upper drops through, that on the bottom. And I don't know a great deal about QA1, how they build their stuff. It seems odd to me that there's this much exposed of the upper ball joint. There's no mention of it in the manual. It could be that once I actually torque this down, it pulls more of it up in there, but for now, that's just kind of how it looks. So I need to check and see what time it is. I may have time tonight to go ahead and put in the steering rack. Yeah, we'll just see. Well, unfortunately, this is where tonight comes to an end. Item 19 is used to install both the lower control arm and the rack and pinion steering. It's 120 thou thick flat washer. Kit's contents 4, my kit contains 2. So I don't have the appropriate hardware to go ahead and continue on with the installation any further. So I guess I'll be reaching out to QA1 tomorrow and see how their customer service works and see about getting replacements or just finding some locally or sourcing some. So yeah, I'll go ahead and we'll continue on with the steering and probably do the steering rack and how I'm doing the steering connection from the factory steering column down to the steering rack. QA1 recommends using an aftermarket column, but I'm going to stick with the original Ford column. I think I figured out a way to do that. So we'll pick up there next time. Thanks. Okay, so I messed up. So in the earlier video, I showed how to install this lower control arm, and I had the 120 thou washer back here, and I also have one installed on the back lower control arm mount, and that is not the case. Here it gets a standard 5/8 washer, here also gets a standard 5/8 washer. In my original video, I had this washer in the rear, this washer goes up in the front, a standard 5/8 washer on the bolt head, and that's all that it gets. It gets two here, and I actually had two per side, and it only has one per side. So that's where my missing flat washer went. So tomorrow we'll start over again with installing the steering rack, connecting the tie rods, and if I have time, get into connecting the steering shaft to the steering rack. So sorry about that. Yeah, details. Thanks.